my pleasure to introduce our speaker to you today. For those of you who are new visiting, we have our pastor, Bob Lyons, and we have taken a few months sabbatical, so we're just carrying the torch while he's gone. And our speaker today is Heather David. She's a member of a partner in this church, and so are her husband, and she has 3 beautiful boys, and she's going to be sharing with you today. So please welcome her.
This easy? Okay. Morning. We'll see if I'm on here. Yeah? Okay. We're going to try this today. We struggled with it last week, so I may switch back and forth, but we're going to try this. So last month, I had the opportunity to speak with you about us never being alone, and I think many of you were here. That was on Mother's Day, and talked about how God is with us, and He affirms that He's always with us through our word, through His Word. We also talked about living in a world of individualism, how today our society is very much independent. We live independently of one another in the world, and we also, I think sometimes we feel alone because we've allowed ourselves to become independent rather than dependent on one another, and you'll hear one another a lot today. The invitation for Him to be the leader of our lives is always open. We just need to accept and embrace it. And I make that sound easy. It's taking me years to get to that point, and I'll share a little bit about that today. Ultimately, God calls us to be part of a community of believers, which we are here today. The world calls us to be individuals. The world calls us to do everything on our own, be superwomen. People sometimes call me superwoman for what I do when Craig's away, and I'm learning that that is really actually a negative thing because I'm not meant to do it on my own. And also, I wonder if you've ever heard anyone say, or maybe you felt yourself, I don't need to be part of a community of church. I don't need to go to church to be part of a community. I can do church at home. I can believe at home. Well, that's true. We can believe at home. We can believe wherever we are. But we also are called to come together. I believe God calls us to move from individualism to depend on Him and to depend on one another. This, again, it took me a number of years, and I'll tell you why and what my situation was. In His day, though, Jesus built community. He built communities of faith where they met in homes. It was very informal. We have a very informal service. They met to worship and learn about God from Jesus. That was His intention for community. He called the disciples to build community, and He calls us to do the same. But how? How do we do this? Especially if we've learned that being alone or being independent, leaning on only a few certain people, how do we get to a broader community? I shared a little bit of my struggle with you in May, particularly how I isolated myself when my boys were little. I could blame it on postpartum and having little ones and really not sleeping. But it was a choice. I chose to isolate myself. And I sometimes still do, to be honest. There's times when I do. I do think, I can do this all by myself. The result is not good. God's growing me, and He's teaching me to prosper in community and to multiply it. And He's placed this message on my heart, but I've always been passionate about community. I shared a little bit about how I grew up in a community where our neighbors were always around. Our neighbor took us camping. I don't know how she fit the number of kids she did in her little Mini Cooper. And I don't want to look back because likely none of us had seatbelts. Some of us were in the trunk. It was what it was. We were safe, we got there, and we had a great time. So I knew what community was, but I departed from that. I wonder what community looks like for you. I'll challenge you on that a little bit today. Most of what I'm going to talk about is rooted in John 15. I'm not going to cover the whole chapter today because it's quite broad, and if any of you have ever really studied a verse or a chapter, it's so rich, there's so much there, so I'll just cover part of it. But I wonder if community for you, is it your family? Is it your friends? Is it LifeBridge? Do you have a support group? Maybe it's coworkers, maybe it's your work environment. Some of us probably don't feel that way. But I want you to consider who's watching out for you and who's got your back. And I'll be back.
I'm getting an evil eye from the back. I guess you're singing solo. Dave, are you resetting? Okay. Well, we're going to go ahead anyway. We're going to test your memory. We're going to do God is Watching Over You.